Kamei. Okay, so we are very fortunate. We got the sponsorship from Sikai, and to sponsor this very special event, we have a panel of very distinguished panelists, 3 of them. So we organized the panel as the following. So we want each of the panelists will give a short self-introduction, because not only they're scientists, they're also entrepreneurs themselves. And then we're having a few key questions, right? We want to hear from each panelist their view to address those set of key questions. Then we're going to open the floor to let the audience to participate, to ask questions that you have in mind and you care about, especially in the process of even becoming an entrepreneur. So let's get started by the first of the introduction first. So first, it's Catherine. Catherine is Dr. Catherine Havasi. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Havasi. I guess I have sort of one foot in both worlds. I have taught and worked at MIT for a very long time at the Media Lab, where I do natural language processing, machine learning, and computational creativity work. And I have had the, opportunity to spin out a number of companies from MIT with students, one of which was a social entrepreneurship company in education called Learning Unlimited, which is not on the board, because it's much smaller. Probably people know me from Luminoso, which is now a more mature startup company that helps people process customer feedback interactions using NLP. And beyond that, I work at MIT, where I also mentor teams that are starting out in entrepreneurship.
Great. And the second one, it's Dr. Louise Johnson.
Hi, it's great to be back at IUI. Actually, a few years ago, I was program co-chair, so it's great to be back with this community. So I sometimes refer to myself as a reformed academic. I did academic research in pedagogical agents until I founded my own company, which creates products that incorporate pedagogical agents to improve teaching and learning, and having a blast. So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
Thank you, Luis. Actually, I want to mention that Luis is also a long-timer IUI goer, Kamei, right? So because he actually still serves on the steering committee as well. Next one is Nancy.
Hi. There's a typo up there. I'm actually Nancy Kamei, ends with an I.
I'm
That's
sorry.
Okay. I'm just finished my rookie year at the National Science Foundation, where I work on the SBIR program, the I-Corps program, and for the last 6 weeks, I've been on the startup team for the new thing at the NSF, which is called Convergence Accelerator. So that Dear Colleague letter was just released very late Friday night, so please go Google that and see if you might be able to be part of a team to apply for Convergence Accelerator. I came to Washington after I'd been retired for a few years because I'm in the meaningfulness phase of my life, and I'm really here serving the country and trying to help strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem for the United States. Prior to that, I had a 30-year business career. I built 4 startups in Silicon Valley, and then I spent 20 years as an investor, both as a venture capitalist and in public equities.
Great, thank you, Nancy. I'm just going to say one word about myself. It is, I started Juji about 4 years ago. That's my very first startup. Probably will be my last as well. Because building a startup is really difficult and hard, and we can share, I'll be happy to share with some of experience. And now let's get started with the real thing right now. So I wanted to have each of the panelists, because each of them has entrepreneurial experience, to really answer this question is, what is entrepreneurship? Maybe let's start with Nancy, because Nancy has 4 startups. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I guess for me, entrepreneurship is creating something and taking the things that you're working on, bringing them out into the world, and using that to fill a void and to build a need and to address a real customer need. So everyone here is working on some kind of interesting technology. And if you're aware of sort of problems in the world that what you're working on could address, being able to build something that connects those two things together is, I think, one of the big things that entrepreneurship is. It's, hey, can we build something small and exciting that really fills a need for customers?
So before you pass that mic around, so if you want to name one of the most important key ingredients in this process, what would it be?
I think one of the key ingredients for all of sort of intelligence and AI right now, this is the greatest audience for, is interacting and understanding your user. And I think that's something that when we think about technologists starting companies, there's often a struggle there. But I think everybody here inherently understands the value of going out there, talking to your users, understanding how they think and understanding what they need. And I think that's a real key. I would also say really being curious, having passion for your idea are important. And the other one is focus. And I think that becomes very important. You know, you have the ability to solve every problem for every user, but you really need to have the discipline to focus on one particular thing.
Great. Luis, be next to you. Yeah.
So I would agree with that. I think my definition of entrepreneurship is identifying a need and then building a business that meets that need. I think the only thing that I would add is that a key part of that is building a business, building an organization. I think we tend to think of entrepreneurs as, lone heroes that go out and conquer the market, but actually entrepreneurship is a team sport. And part of your job as an entrepreneurial leader is to create an effective entrepreneurial team. And we can talk about that more during the panel.
You want to say about the key ingredients you think is most important in entrepreneurship?
Oh, I think the key thing is to have a strong vision and the ability to communicate and lead that to your team and in the marketplace, especially in this type of area where we're really conceiving new types of products that may be unfamiliar to the marketplace. You really need to be able to convey to the marketplace the value that your solution has to offer.
Thank you, Luis. It's Nancy.
So let me ask, how many of you are already entrepreneurs? And how many of you want to become entrepreneurs? Interesting.
We need more.
We need more, right?
So I would say that there are many ways to change the world, and entrepreneurship is one platform from which you can change the world. So I think you have to have an idea about what direction you want the world to go in, but entrepreneurship can be a really powerful way to change the world. And I have a belief, so this is just my personal belief, that the for-profit company is the most powerful vehicle if you want to change the world. There's lots of other vehicles, and if you had a different set of people up here, they might, be putting their money down on some other idea. But just based on my experience, I really feel like when you're in a for-profit company, you can get people aligned and you can head off in a direction and really make things happen. And so what
are key ingredients you think is most important?
So I actually think it's persistence and resilience. And I think it's something that's somewhat lacking in some young people now, where the road has been too smooth when they were young. I think it's much better to fall down when you're young and learn how to pick yourself back up and keep going. That's, I think, the most important thing in successful entrepreneurs.
So before you put down your mic, because you said you built like 4 startups, right? So and you think the resilience and persistence are the key ingredients in this particular on this particular journey.
Yeah.
So maybe you can give a very specific example in your journey in entrepreneurship that demonstrated that such characteristics really kind of will help the entrepreneurship.
So in my very first company, I was kind of an accidental entrepreneur, but in my very first company, I started up from scratch in Palo Alto, right near Stanford, with some Stanford founders. And literally every hour of every day, something was going wrong. So like the electricity was failing, or somehow the fire alarm got tripped and the fire department is showing up. And it was so much noise that just sort of being in reactive mode. And that first year as an entrepreneur, I really learned to kind of rise up above the noise so that I could, as someone else said, get focused and really move forward. And so I think that in the day-to-day life of an entrepreneur, things are failing and breaking every day. And you know, you always have to make a rational decision. Did that fail and break and mean I should let it go? Or did it fail and break and I actually should persist? And that's really what you learn over a long period of time, you know, really being on the firing line.
And when things fail, the tendency is to blame yourself. And the real challenge for an entrepreneur is to get past that. What's done is done, learn from it, pick up and move on. That is a key skill to develop.
Before you pass on, because Luis told me something very interesting, and especially I saw the audience, when Nancy asked how many of you want to become entrepreneurs, I don't see a lot of hands, which means that is, I assume you're coming to this academic conference, maybe you want to stay in academia. Then Luis, you said something, the entrepreneurship itself, maybe the key ingredients, that kind of experience can help academic research as well.
Yeah, well, we can talk about this more, but I think people, you know, imagine that research ends once you go into, you know, start a business. But actually, certainly a technology-based business is doing research all the time, identifying what's wrong with our product, how can we improve it, how can we evaluate alternative solutions. I think the thing that we learn as entrepreneurs is how to do that rapidly. That you're not limited by the PhD schedule of, okay, I've got, you know, a few years to solve this problem. I gotta solve this problem now because my product is failing and we need to come up with a solution. That kind of urgency actually has benefits. And I think one of the big benefits is that you can reach a much wider audience. I mean, once, like for example, with our current platform, once we started getting learners signed up in dozens of countries around the world and then collecting data from all those users is like, wow, we couldn't do that before. So those are there's a real opportunity to do research in a private business context.
Great.
And I think that people, one thing you have to get good at is you have to get good at being told no. And that's something that's really hard to do. And I think when you're told no, you have to be very objective about it and be able to be introspective and say, hey, let me listen and learn from this person and not, again, very much not blame yourself. But, you know, when you're raising money, when you're talking to initial customers, you're going to get told no a lot. And there's a lot of reasons that have not as much to do with, you know, your business or those sorts of things. So you have to find the right people, the right partners to get started with, and you have to learn from every time that happens. And to build off something else you said, there's actually there's a lot of things that you learn in building a lab, if you think about what you're doing after you get your PhD, that also kind of applies to entrepreneurship. In both places, you have to go out, you have to figure out how what you're doing applies to how you get funding, you have to learn how to manage people. And in both cases, I think it's interesting, this isn't something that anybody teaches you when you start being an entrepreneur, and it's not something that anyone teaches you when you start being a faculty member. So I feel like there's some overlap there, which is why a lot of people end up being accidental entrepreneurs with students or when they're doing a postdoc or something like that, because I think there are qualities in both that overlap.
Before we actually move on to the next topic, I want to actually summarize a little bit what the panelists have just said, because many of their comments resonated with my own experience as an entrepreneur as well. So for example, like I think all the panelists have touched upon, you have to build something people care. I think some of you who are in the entrepreneurship community, you have heard about the Y Combinator, right? Heard about, it's a very famous kind of like earlier stage, I would say, investor, right? So whatever they have a slogan is, you have to build something people love. And I learned this very, very dearly in the I-Corps program, which is run by the NSF. So a large chances when the startup fails is because you built something nobody cares. That's a problem. But then going back to academia, if you write a paper, if you're doing the research, if you solve the problems, nobody care. And what do you think? You think the paper will be published? Paper will get funding? Or paper will go very far? No, because I think what I learned in my entrepreneurship in the last 4 years, it'll be 4 years and several months now, you really have to build something people do care so you can actually go to the next step. And then next one, so then we're going to switch topic a little bit. It is to go align. Oh, actually, we talked about this one, right? So you guys have anything to add? What takes to become an entrepreneur? What do I need to do? How do I prepare in case people want to become entrepreneurs? Just add, yeah.
So a lot of you are in universities. A lot of universities have some kind of entrepreneurship support or training programs, and you probably don't know about them because they historically are really bad at advertising, right? And it's also possible they have 4 and that those programs don't know the other ones exist. So really do your homework, go out, learn what kind of resources are out there. At least at MIT, we have a program called Sandbox, where if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, you can get a tiny bit of money and some support way in the beginning when you're first learning, and we teach you some interesting stuff. And I think that's a good place to start if your university has a similar program. Just check it out and see if something like that exists.
So I like the NSF programs for entrepreneurs. In fact, I went through one of the programs after having started my company and learned a lot in the process. I think that one of the key skills, I mean, there's a whole bunch of skills you need to learn as part of becoming an entrepreneur. I think one thing is that you need to really have the skill of learning how to learn. You are constantly learning new things as an entrepreneur. I think the biggest trap you can get into as an entrepreneur is to think that you know it all. I think one of the skills that I would highlight that I don't, is sometimes can be a problem from people leaving academia, it certainly was a problem for me, is learning to communicate effectively. Learning to communicate simply, clearly, and persuasively. In academia, there's not so much a premium on clear communication. But if you cannot convey your ideas clearly, they're not going to get any traction.
And I want to add to that quickly, too. Yes. They're not going to listen to you to go through 20 slides. 10 slides, too many. Literally, probably 1 slide. You have to clearly communicate what your solution, what your startup does, actually solve the problem they care. And you may solve many, many problems, but it has to be solved one problem they care very much about it.
Could I add one more thing before, which is, I think, by the way, this is a particularly important skill for women entrepreneurs. And we'll talk about that in the next question.
Great.
So, right now in this world, I think there's this huge emphasis about entrepreneurs. So like everybody's out there wanting to be an entrepreneur. And those of us in the field, we're not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point. But the National Science Foundation has made a couple of programs available so that you can just kind of, with not too much cost to your professional career, try it. So the first program has been mentioned already. It's the Innovation Core, the I-Core program. We have a network of 9 nodes and 99 sites at academic institutions all across the country running various forms of that program, anywhere from a few days to 8 weeks. And in the National I-Core program, we've trained 1,500 teams, almost 5,000 people, to give inventors a chance to see if their invention can become a company and whether or not they like the idea of being an entrepreneur. So that's something you could certainly try. And if you actually decide to start a company, then we have the SBIR program, which was invented at the NSF in 1976. It now runs at $200 million a year. We're putting into about 400 new startups. But it is run at 11 federal agencies now, so it's a $2.5 billion program across the government. And this is a chance to start a company and get some funding at a stage where these companies are usually too early for regular investors. Like as a venture capitalist, I would have looked at almost all our SBIR grantees and said, it's too early. But this is exactly what the government is trying to make available for you, is this very, very high-risk, high-impact R&D funding. And so those programs are out there if you're thinking you might have something that could become a company.
Thank you, Nancy. Actually, I wanted to vouch for one of the programs our company went through. It's the I-Core program. Even though we got funded from a DoD side of it, but the I-Core program actually is really run by the NSF. So they have actually, we went through 8 weeks, right? So it's almost like a lease. So we started the Juji before we went to the I-Core program. I wish that I should go to the I-Core program first, then start Juji, because we learned a really great deal. And you're allowed to fail, like Nancy said, right? So this is a kind of a small investment that you want to get into, and especially when you're earlier career stage, and to try it out and to see if this is a path you like or not. You have nothing to lose. And it's just a great learning experience as well, and not mentioning the network effect as well. That's how I found Nancy. because I knew that we have this, thanks to Wai Tai, who told me about this panel. Then I said, oh, I need to get the people from the I-Core program come here to tell us more about entrepreneurship. Okay, great. And then let's move on to the next topic, which is really around the theme of this particular panel. So why is women entrepreneurship important, and how do we foster women entrepreneurship? And okay, so we have 2 women on the panel, 3.
All right, so if we go out and we look at the statistics, is this being recorded?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
If we go out and we look at the statistics, we find that a lot of investors are men. And when they look at companies, and one of the things that people do, regardless of how well trained they are, is they see, how would this company fit into my life, right? And so you end up with a preponderance of startups that fit problems that are either universal or problems that guys have. And when women try to raise money for companies that, you know, sell to women, they traditionally have a lot of issues, right? And so I think we've seen, and so that means that a lot of that market is not being served very well, and that there's lots of opportunity there, and I think that's important, right? And I think when we think about women in investing as well, we see so much of that happening now where people are being aware of this problem and starting to think about it. So we have teams that go out and can pitch specifically for women investors. And I think diversity is very, very important, and having good diverse teams when you're building anything, because again, you know, your users are everybody in the world, so the people who are building for your users should reflect who your users are. And I think that's tremendously important.
So obviously I'm not a woman, but I have women in key positions in my leadership team. My chief revenue officer is a woman, and this has really highlighted for me the importance of effective, diverse teams in an entrepreneurial setting. But then the question is, well, what makes them effective? And this is something that I've learned a lot from the work that we do in creating training courses for cross-cultural communication, really trying to train people to work as part of effective cross-cultural teams. I recognize, well, this is something that actually applies to any diverse team. The ability to understand other people's perspectives and to work effectively together, even though you have very, very different skills. So I think this is why I want to see more women entrepreneurs, because I want to see more people that I can work with.
So for sure, as it was mentioned, it's harder. if you're a woman or if you're anything different and you're trying to raise money or, build companies, the statistics have shown that that is true. But of course, it's better for the world if we unleash the potential of all our best minds. And so that's why it's important for women to be entrepreneurs, but then really any underrepresented kind of group in the entrepreneurial world, that logic would hold the same thing. And so there's huge power in diversity. And so I'm plugging Convergence Accelerators again, but that is one of the principles. We're going to bring together multidisciplinary teams from more than one kind of entity for exactly the reason that was just stated. When you get people learning how to talk to each other cross-culturally, it really unleashes the power of different kinds of ideas. And I would say for women entrepreneurs or for diverse entrepreneurs, I would say there's kind of a generational shift happening. So, I built my first company in the 80s. Okay, so if you do the math, that will tell you how old I am. And really, the investors that invested in the companies that I was working in, they were really taking a chance at that point in time. And boy, I'm so grateful to those people. I still, see them and work with them now. But the younger investors that are coming up, they're much more used to seeing different kinds of people leading companies. And so I think going forward, it maybe is cracking, through that it's going to be a little easier.
And I would say this is a shift that's happening pretty rapidly and happening in the last couple of years, really. And, when Luminoso was founded in 2010, I didn't see many women VCs. I saw organizations that were small angel groups that were women only. But when you went out into the world, you never saw partners at VC companies that weren't specifically, hey, we're a woman VC. And that's definitely changing, and the way people think about things are definitely changing. So
I wanted to actually speak from my experience in knowing a group of women entrepreneurs. I want to say this one without kind of being sexist. I think women make great entrepreneurs for a couple reasons. First one, women are very persistent and resilient, like exactly Nancy pointed. Second one, I think women are very collaborative. So when women want to do something, get things done, their first goal is get things done instead of getting their ego in the way. So this is how I found this over and over again by talking to many women entrepreneurs in my circle. Third one, which I think is also very important, is women very down to earth. So I was kind of, I'm going to this meeting with about 25 women co-founders and CEOs in Silicon Valley. So you heard their stories about how they prepare themselves to raise money. Every single women entrepreneur in our group, I was so impressed that they have a product out, they have revenues, versus they said, okay, I just have something on paper, I'm going to raise a lot of money. So I said, and then some people actually don't raise money. I said, why? I said, I need to build out a little bit more. That may be the downside. We can talk about faster women entrepreneurship. Then I found that oh my God, they really have businesses. And then they're very responsible financially. So I did see one of the, like from PitchBook, they were talking about it is looking at the success rate of women-led startups. Their success rate is much higher actually than men-led, even though the percentage of women-led companies is much lower. So that's why in that case, I encourage women, you really have that kind of characteristics of being an entrepreneur and to lead a company. So then I'm going back to the one. So what should we learn? So I'm going to kind of like, how to say, pose the questions, my dilemma. So I think Silicon Valley has been changing. They are now having also women investors too, right? Before I think fewer, now and more. I found this, it's being recorded, but I guess it's okay. I say this one basically from my own experience. I found here, maybe it's related to the communication Louis hinted, I have hard time to convince actually women investors. And not just that, actually some of my worst experience coming from that kind of a conversation, either I just lost them very quickly, or I just didn't go anywhere, right? I didn't go well, because you can feel, maybe another way around we said that maybe women investors are very honest. They just don't pretend that they like you. So they can just say no quickly. So I just want to actually maybe get some of the reactions from the panelists. Because naturally, tendency is, oh, great. I'm a woman. I would like to approach women, investors. So maybe just in general, doesn't necessarily choose to pitch to women investors, just investors in general, or public in general.
So I definitely pitch to anybody if I'm raising capital. I mean, I think one of the things you do when an entrepreneur is that I heard at one point in time, to some degree, you're always raising money. So to just quickly insert a very practical piece of advice here, which is that when you meet somebody who might be a funder, it doesn't matter where you are in your cycle, talk to that person. And it doesn't matter who they are, talk to that person, because you build a relationship over time. It becomes so much easier to raise money from somebody later on when they know you and they understand you and they know how you think. And, this is being recorded, so what the heck? I'm working on I'm working on something else right now that's in stealth mode, and the people we're talking to are people I've known for a long time and have been talking to about this for a long time. And that makes a very different relationship than when, say, in 2010, I walked into somebody's office and said, hey, I want to use natural language processing and this thing called, deep learning that you've never heard of to make market research smarter, and that didn't go over so well, right? But, you can play off relationships, That was a total non sequitur, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to get that piece of advice in. I think to some degree, I think, I've seen all different kinds of women in venture and women in private equity. I do as a consultant, I've done for years, even longer than I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a due diligence consultant. I don't know if I'm more honest with the companies I'm doing due diligence with. I think I'm very nice to everyone. I try very hard to be very nice, even if I'm asking you extremely hard questions about your technology. And I think one of the things through that process is, is part of also having been in their shoes. So I think that's a difference I see in investors as investors who have been entrepreneurs and investors who haven't. And so maybe one of the things that you're seeing is that more women who are investors haven't necessarily been entrepreneurs because fewer women have been entrepreneurs. And I definitely see that difference as well.
Makes sense.
So I think that there are a lot of investors and senior entrepreneurs who are interested in supporting young women entrepreneurs and get them started. Certainly, my own chief revenue officer is interested in doing that kind of thing. So that's certainly one possible reason for talking with women investors. But I wouldn't advise limiting yourself to women investors. I think this question of, well, is the deck stacked when you pitch your idea? I discussed this question with a friend of mine who leads the angel investor community here in the Silicon Beach area, and he said, just looking at the statistics, that the success rate of funding of women ventures was not less than that of male-led ventures, in fact, might be higher. But what he did note is that relatively few women pitch their ventures. So there clearly is a bottleneck somewhere in the process up to the point where somebody has a business plan that they're ready to present. And I think that identifying where help and fostering is needed within that process, I think, is necessary.
So I would say that this business and every business in life, it's all about relationships. So it's really all about the long-term relationships that you can make with people. And so having sat in the investor seat for 20 years, really, entrepreneurs didn't convince me of anything. I already had an investment strategy. I already knew what I was looking for. I had a mandate from my clients, what they were looking for. We were either looking for, in some funds, $500,000 investments, in other funds, we were looking for $500 million investments. And so it's about finding a good fit. And so, having a conversation with the investors and really understanding, from their point of view, what are they looking for? And it may or may not be a fit. You can still have a nice conversation and stay in touch because, they may change seats and be working for a different fund. But I don't think that, if I'm like a digital health investor, I don't think you come and convince me to work on, I don't know, whatever, the company. So I think it's more about being out there and understanding what you have, the value you have in your company, and trying to find the right fit. And then the second thing I would say is about give and take. So there's a book called Give and Take, which a lot of young people have read, and I recommended when I taught at the MBA level. Because I think really the best strategy in the long run is to find a way to give something to these, in any relationship, to give, and then, after you've done that for a while, then maybe you go and ask for a favor. But I think that that's a much more successful approach than saying, I want your money, like right out of the box. And I haven't seen that work. And the last thing I would say is this idea that you're going to pitch to somebody and they're going to write you a check for $1 million. I've also never seen that happen. It only happens in the movies that I know of. If that happens in a meeting, I don't know how high of a quality of investor that would be, first of all. But secondly, that can happen if you have a really long-standing relationship with somebody and they've watched you move in and out of companies over a long period of time, and then you come and you say, I have this idea, and then they say, I'm in. Okay, so that can happen to you kind of later in your journey, but having that expectation that you're going in to pitch and you're going to get money out of that meeting, I think is really like impossible. You have to be thinking about having a series of meetings and getting to know each other and making sure that, whoever you're approaching as an investor and you're going to invite them on the board, that they're really somebody you want to row that boat with, through difficult waters. I don't think it's like a snap decision.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's easy to be confused about this because there are all these pitch fests that seem to all about, it's a series of pitches, but that's really a small part of what is involved in funding a company.
Yeah, and absolutely. When I was saying build a relationship with people, everyone you meet, that's what it is. It's about getting to know investors and being able to build that relationship over time. And what you were saying about why people say no is often because of the investment mandate, right? If I'm working with a PE company, they're out there looking for a very specific type of technology or shape of team or something like that. It's a very specific investment size, all these different things. So when I talk about saying no earlier and it being hard and you need to introspect, sometimes you need to understand that the reasons people say no are very, very diverse, right? And it can go back to, hey, this is just not the shape of investment somebody is looking for right now.
I think one of the key questions investors are thinking when they meet with you for the first time is this person investable? Are they credible? Are they trustworthy? Can I trust them to tell me when things aren't going well? And so, you're sitting there having this meeting and you think you're like showing all your slides. You're showing your slides with the big hockey stick projections, everything, but they're looking at you and they're saying like, can I trust this person?
Great. And I think now we want to kind of open the floor for questions. I think we have about, we should end at around 12:15, right? It's an hour, right? So we have about 15 minutes. So we can open up the floor and then you can come if you want to ask questions. If the mic there, right? Show your hand first, and then volunteer will give you a
Did
mic.
anybody who wasn't thinking they wanted to be an entrepreneur change their mind as a result of this panel?
Here, yeah.
I want to add just one thing before we go to open Q&A, was why do this? And the
Oh,
reason
okay.
why you do it is because you can make an impact with a private company that's much greater than you can have in a research lab. I'm sure that's why Michelle is doing what she's doing. That's why we're all doing this. So think of that. If you have an idea you think can make a difference, you need to build a company that can accomplish that.
Yeah, I second that, and especially I remember Nancy said earlier, the way to make an impact in the world through the nonprofit companies, actually it is the way. And sometimes the money does talk, does drive things. Okay, go ahead. So who has a mic? Okay, great.
Hello, thank you. That was very helpful. I'm one of those people. My name is Joanna Rączaszek-Leonardi. I come from Poland, Warsaw. And thank you for this. Thank you for the last two things that you were saying, because entrepreneurship is, it's good to think about it not only as making money or people making money off us, right, of the companies, but also changing your world in a faster pace. And then I am an academic, and I'm happy, and I'm an happy academic. Maybe I will change my mind still, but I would like, I see that not everybody is happy in academia because of the pace of work, pace of success, some kind of success that you can draw from academia, not only science progress, but also teaching people and so on. But I would love to collaborate with young entrepreneurship people and send them on this path. And the question is, how can we academics help them, but also how to retain a very good relationship after they become successful entrepreneurship people, right? So do you have an advice here? Because I have people in my lab who work very hard and who want to start their companies, but then there are all those kinds of legal issues about patentable things and so on, and I feel it stalls the progress of science even, because then it says, oh no, don't put it on your poster because we might want to patent it very, very soon, and so on. So do you have any advice, like not to worry about it too much or worry about it and so on? Sorry for the long question, but it was very inspiring. Thank you.
Anyone want to take a shot at it?
Well, I think part of the issues you raise are institutional issues. Is your university supportive of entrepreneurship or not? And some are more supportive than others. I would say, though, that if you do manage to help an entrepreneur launch, they're going to come back and be in contact with you, because they're going to want to know, well, what are the new things that are happening in your lab? Are there some opportunity? They're going to be looking to hire your students. So, and again, you're we talked about relationships. The relationship that you establish with entrepreneurs will pay dividends in the future.
It's absolutely an institutional thing. And I think that for a long time, sort of, in the US, it was sort of West Coast was very supportive and East Coast didn't know what they were doing. And what we sort of watching that transition happen in the Media Lab at MIT was interesting, because for a while it was a very entrepreneurial place. We work every day with companies. Media Lab is mostly sponsored by companies rather than by government grants. It's a little bit different of model. And so we end up with a lot of students who see real problems and then think about how they're going to apply them. And when there was no formal framework, it was really a point of stress, exactly what you're talking about. There was all the IP questions. There were people who were afraid if they told their PhD supervisor that I don't know, they would get in some terrible trouble. And so we had students who were secretly trying to run companies out of their office. Once right next to the faculty member's office, and I'm not sure how that didn't get noticed. But I think when at a certain point in time, the university and the faculty sort of got together and said, hey, look, to the director of the lab, and we had a new director at the time from an entrepreneurial background, something's got to change. And I think there's a lot of different models that are happening, and more universities are realizing that they need to do this right, and that there's great you can add a lot to the university by supporting entrepreneurs within the university, and you take away from that sort of stressful relationship, and the entrepreneurs have a better relationship with the university when they go off into the world.
So in the I-Corps program, the applicants are a team. And in that team, there are often people like you who serve as the technical lead or the PI on the I-Corps team. And so please, if you haven't already, get one of those groups together and apply for an I-Corps program. And it really does shift people's thinking, the mindset, when you go through an I-Corps program. And so the key a key issue is, what is the company's value proposition? What is the team's value proposition? But I'll just take that to the next level for you, Joanne, that when you're thinking about maintaining these relationships with students as they move on, you just need to be thinking about your own value proposition. So what are you bringing to those companies, and why would they want to keep having you on their board or having you as an advisor? And maybe an I-Corps program will clarify that.
Great, thank you. So let's go to we have about 10 minutes left. So next question. Go ahead.
Hi, Denis Parra from the Catholic University of Chile. Thank you for the panel. All the questions and comments have been very, very intense and important. One question I have is that you mentioned at the beginning two important traits or characteristic of people successful, right? Like persistence and resilience. But my feeling is that when I talk with my colleagues about successful research or PhD students, they also have to be persistent and resilient. So what is that additional thing that an entrepreneur should have? Or it's just that a good PhD student can be just a good entrepreneur?
It's different when you've got your own company on the line. You've put all of your equity, you may have put your family's money in the company, and you've got employees that depend upon you. And so that raises the stakes and makes resilience more challenging. But I agree with you. I mean, resilience is something which students can demonstrate. I guess what I say is that as an entrepreneur, you're going to develop a thick hide, ability to take knocks and keep going. So I think we tend to think about resilience as a trait, but it is something that you can learn and develop in the course of your entrepreneurial career.
I would say that really being aware of your user is something that is very much the key to be, one of the keys to be an entrepreneur, and focus, as I mentioned early on. And I think those are not something that you need as a PhD student. I even think that in some ways, in the beginning of your PhD, focus is not, at the end, hopefully you've learned to focus, because otherwise you're never going to graduate. That's not always true. But I think that that's a quality that, both of those things are qualities that we don't necessarily need in a lab.
So in some ways, getting your PhD is sort of a controlled environment, right? You're in a university, there's a lot of infrastructure, and so you have to be persistent and resilient, and you have to finish your PhD. And so absolutely, this is a life skill that we're talking about in successful entrepreneurs. But imagine being taken out of that, structured environment in the university, and you're out in the wild yonder, or whatever, wild blue yonder, sorry, where there's no infrastructure. You have to keep the lights on. You have to make payroll. The pressures of having to create your own infrastructure in a startup company are immense. I mean, the idea, when we were out raising money, we knew exactly how many weeks of runway we had left, and we knew that if we didn't raise this $25 million from this corporate partner, we weren't going to be able to make payroll. And all those families, weren't going to be able to send their kids to college. And so I would say that the real the real world versus the academic world, there's a lot more pressure out in the real world. And so it's way more challenging, in the face of that, when you have a failure in your company, a small one or a big one, to just keep going.
I actually love what Nancy's analogy. I just want to add this back. If you're talking about the level of resilience, the persistency, the entrepreneur should have versus the PhD student have, it's almost like ask the PhD student to get a PhD without the advisor, without the assistantship, right? Pretty much. You have to also figure out how can you sponsor yourself through in these 6 years to get your PhD. Plus, how can you also sponsor, let's say 5 or 10 along the way, other people to help you to finish the PhD? And without the advisor as well. You have to figure out your own direction.
I would respectfully disagree a bit with what you just said. Because I think it's very important as an entrepreneur to develop a strong network of people who can advise you.
Right.
It may not be an individual advisor who's assigned to you, but you have to find, who has insights that can help you succeed. And the successful ones have lots of people that they can draw on their board, their investors. That is a key to success.
No, I agree with what Luis said. I'm talking about one part of entrepreneurship. It is you have to build such a network. So it's kind of like you don't have a professor or advisor to start with.
Out,
Yeah,
exactly.
to start off, right.
This is, okay. And I think that when we think about, earlier we were talking about people don't write checks in the room. People definitely don't write checks in the room. And when you're working with investors or when you're talking with people who could be advisors, really think about the value they're adding. And the value really should go beyond just the money they're giving you. That they can be that sounding board, they can be that network, they can be that help, right? And I think that becomes very important. Think about the relationship. This is not a perfect analogy by any means, but think about the relationship with your investors as the relationship with your PhD advisor. And the amount that things can be great or bad based on the quality of that relationship is absolutely true as an entrepreneur.
But all these characteristics we talked about, what makes a successful entrepreneur, you just take all those characteristics and they're going to make you successful in life, not just being an entrepreneur, right? So, yeah.
I think there's a book called The Start of Yourself or Start of Your Own or something like that. Start of You, right? So let's go with maybe just a couple questions and we're going to end the panel. So here, yeah.
Hi, thanks for all the information and the very helpful guidelines. We keep hearing this line that investors are more skeptical about ideas and discoveries that are coming from research labs and academia compared to ideas that come from the industry. And I just want to know if you have seen similar themes and what are your thoughts about how to tackle that? Thank you.
So the really interesting thing is that almost all investors know that when you take university technology out of a lab, and this is actually no different, I don't know what the statistics are in industry, but Bayer has a statistic from the pharmaceutical side that about 60% of the things that they want to commercialize out of a university, they don't make the transition. It's never something that they can implement in the real world. And I think that could be where that comes from. And there's also a fear of academic-oriented founders, if they don't know how to talk about business fit and go-to-market strategy and all these sorts of things. There is, if you want to learn a little bit about that, there's this thing you might have heard of called Lean Startup, and there's something called a business canvas that you can do in there. So when you take your idea, if you go through the business canvas, if you learn how to speak those languages, I think you help the investor get over that fear.
Yeah, Steve Blank has a series of videos. You go to his website and he takes you through it. It's very, very useful. Let's go back to our definition of entrepreneurship at the beginning, which is to identify a need and then address it. So academics are better at identifying solutions than identifying needs, okay? So I think, someone coming from an academic research lab says, well, this is cool, but what problem is this solving? And that's the thing that tends to get lost.
So the I-Corps program is based on the whole business model canvas and lean startup, so please come to I-Corps. But to your question, I think it's not so much about coming out of academia versus coming out of industry. It's about really understanding where this innovation or invention is on the developmental path of going from an idea to an invention to an innovation to a company, you know, and matching up with investors who have time horizons. So every investor out there has an assignment from the people who own their firms. You know, we want you to get return literally in a day. I mean, that's the, you know, high frequency trading on Wall Street, or a quarter, or a year, or a firm I worked with 4 years. That's how we were evaluated. Venture capitalist, plus or minus 7 years. And what you need to understand is, where are we, and what kind of investable milestones can we demonstrate in a year, 5 years, whatever. And then again, you've got to go out and match your company or your idea up with somebody who's looking for that time frame. You know, and every investor is looking for something different. So, you know, it's really complicated figuring that out. But I mean, I think that's the issue. So I don't think it's about industry versus academia. It's more about understanding where you are. Are you an infant company or a toddler company or a teenage company? Or
And also, I think going back to Luis's earlier comments on, it's also how you phrase it in a world of entrepreneurship. Because now, your audience will be the investors, right? Like exactly Nancy said, they have set of goals on their mind. Like I think I make mistakes very often at the beginning of my entrepreneurship. When I go to pitch somebody, when I went to pitch somebody, I said, is this a research project? If that's a research project I'm not interested in, it's not interested in the idea, they're not interested in how, you didn't say it, is how your solution will actually make a business impact, right, for them as well. So actually we're running out of time, and maybe because we have this ongoing lunch meetings, during lunch you can have this conversation, continue the conversation with each of the panelists as well. So maybe we want to ask each of the panelists to give just last one sentence, what's the advice you want to give to the people? Either they haven't made up the mind to become entrepreneur yet, or they already made up the mind to become entrepreneurs. So,
Well,
last word. Yeah.
I hope you will do it. I guess last thought that I have is that actually, if you succeed in completing a PhD, you have already developed some of the key traits in terms of learning how to learn and the persistence to get the task done and solve a problem that's not well defined. So that's getting you part of the way there. So don't give up. You just get the rest of the way there.
I think one of the reasons why fewer women become entrepreneurs is because they feel like they have to have everything perfect before they get started. And I think one of the things, the advice that I would get out there is get out there, start thinking, start getting to know people, and exactly, just do it. I mean, I think if you really want to do something and you feel that passion, you're an entrepreneur and you should acknowledge that.
So to the last questioner, I forgot to say that the SBIR program is exactly for these really early stage ideas. And the whole program was put in place for innovations that aren't ready for investors. So we're really looking for the very high risk, high impact R&D. And then to this last question, I don't think the question is whether you should be an entrepreneur or not. I think the question is that you should all just be really happy and have fulfilling lives. And for some of you, that's going to mean being an entrepreneur. But you are really, by definition, the best and brightest people this country has to offer. And we want all of you to find the path where you're really going to be able to give your best work to the country and the world. So I hope for some of you that's being an entrepreneur, but all of you have everything going for you to have just an amazing future.
Great. I just want to thank all the panelists for their wisdom, for their advice. And then we'll continue in actually in a patio out For those of you who got invited, signed up, got invited, you can go out to the patio, I think the restaurant, the patio,